Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
I have to apologize for the missed episode last week, but I was away. I actually went to Ireland for the week with my best friend. It was an amazing trip. It was wonderful. It was magical. It was perfect. But I'm home now. I've been under the weather for a couple days, but I'm getting back on my feet. I finally was able to get out of bed today, and I think I should be back to tip-top shape in no time. With that, let's continue with the episode for today. Hello, welcome back. I'm Rebecca. I'm your host for The Bitter Witness. I hope you've had a good week. You know, I was thinking about it. I guess you could say I'm the bitter witness. I've had a very busy week. I'm well into my next production at my community theater, and rehearsals are going well. Learning my lines. I'm acting in this one. I'm also producing this one, so not as much work as the last one, but still enough. I've had a request for an update on the freaking squirrel that was in my back porch last week. The boys chased it out into the backyard, but I'm pretty sure the little bastard has made his way back inside. Every time I let the dogs out in the backyard, there seems to be something new chewed up or something moved. So I guess we're going to have to do something about that because we both can't live in this house. Not me. I'm not going anywhere near that fucking thing. Squirrels are crazy, man. They'll kill you. This is a job for my boys. I have 5 sons, and 3 of them are still living at home, all in their 20s, so I think they're man enough now to handle a squirrel. I feel as though we need to name the squirrel. I think I'll call him Marv. He looked like a Marv when he was looking at me with his beady little eyes bulging out of his head, and his little paws were all spread, all spastic-like, screeching like he was being murdered. So Marv it is. Let's get the business out of the way. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us. You can do that either on Spotify or over on Patreon. I found out that the Patreon comes up as an over 18 only account. So when you search for The Bitter Witness, you won't actually be able to see a picture of me, but it will come up in the search tab. You may have to extend your search, but I am there. The dogs are sleeping behind me. Miley and Piper are snoring nice and loud, so puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both the dogs. Grab a cup of tea, sit back, relax as I tell you about the case of the disappearance and murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. As always, I want to give the victim in this case top billing. So Dorothy, I acknowledge you and send my love to you wherever you may be. Dorothy Jane Scott was born April 23, 1948, to Jacob and Vera Scott. At the time of her disappearance, she was living with her aunt and 4-year-old son Shanty, but Dorothy called him Sean. They were living in Stanton, California. Her son Sean's father is a man named Dennis Terry, who was living in Fairgrove, Missouri at the time of her disappearance. Dorothy was pretty quiet about their relationship. She had been touring with an all-girls band for a while. When she moved back home, she really didn't speak much about the situation, and outside of her history with Sean's father, not that that's really a history, it's just a relationship. But everybody was like, ooh, it's a story. It's not. It's just a relationship. So calm the fuck down, people. Dorothy was known to be quiet and preferred to stay home and spend time with her son and family. She was a devout Christian and didn't drink or smoke. Dorothy was known for doing whatever she could to help others. People said that Dorothy had a heart of gold, and her brother stated if it was cold outside and you didn't have a sweater or a coat, Dorothy would take the one off of her body and hand it to you, without question, without thinking twice. That's how wonderful this woman was. Her father, Jacob, said that she didn't have any steady boyfriends or go on dates very often. She didn't seem to have any romantic relationships, and the only ex they knew about was Dennis Terry, Sean's father. According to Anthony Sherlock's blog, he's a crime blogger, new resources have become available saying Dorothy may have been bisexual, I don't see how that's even remotely relevant to this case, because what someone does in their bedroom is nobody else's fucking business. It doesn't make any difference in this case. So needless to say, Dorothy wasn't dating anyone at the time of her disappearance. Coworkers and friends said she preferred staying home and was devoted to her son Sean. Dorothy was a secretary for 2 jointly owned Anaheim stores. The shops were owned by John Kikola, I hope I said that right, who purchased the business from Dorothy's father. One of the shops sold psychedelic items like love beads and lava lamps, and the other was a head shop. Why do they call them head shops? You know what? I'm going to Google this. I'll be right back. The magic Google box told me that there was a few different origins and explanations. One was from a weed website, and it said, while the word head shop may have found its way back into popular vocabulary, the origin of the term may still seem elusive and confusing. No shit, Sherlock. Some claim HEAD is actually an acronym for He Eats Acid Daily. Others may relate the term to a popular nickname for fans of the Grateful Dead, Deadheads. But more than likely, the term actually found its seeds in slang that originated in 1913. This year marked the first documentation of someone pairing the name of a drug with the word head to denote a subject as an addict. In the 60s, when acid heads and pot heads became a pronounced aspect of American counterculture, head shops appeared to cater to those who wanted to improve their experiences. The song White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, fucking awesome song, repeats the line, "Feed your head," at the song's closing. A challenge to the listener to expand his or her mind. In essence, the mission of a smoke head shop was to help its clients feed their heads. Another weed website stated that they're called head shops because the term comes from some groovy 1960s slang. The head shop was a place to get your head straight. If something is heady, it fits a certain hippie aesthetic. So that's quite a few explanations of its origin. I'm going to go with the Jefferson Airplane one just because Grace Slick fucking rocks. Dorothy's parents lived in Anaheim and they would babysit her son for her while she was at work. Dorothy felt comfortable and secure knowing that her parents had Sean. Months before her abduction, Dorothy started receiving some strange phone calls at work from an unidentified man. The caller alternately professed his love for her and his intent to kill her. Dorothy's mother recounted, quote, "One day he called and said go outside because he had left something for her. She went out and there was a single dead rose on the windshield of her car," unquote. Dorothy's mother said one call especially horrified her daughter. The man reportedly told Dorothy he would get her alone and cut her up into bits so no one would ever find her. Okay, that's fucking creepy. Dead rose? Don't leave anything dead on my car. Just don't. Because of these phone calls, Dorothy started considering the purchase of a handgun, but she never actually made the purchase. Dorothy never bought the gun because she was too afraid that Sean somehow might get a hold of the gun and might actually shoot himself and hurt himself. And she also started taking karate lessons for self-defense. Dorothy told her mother, Vera, that the voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't place where she knew the voice from. One coworker reported that Dorothy had moved 3 times between October 1979 and May 1980, all because of the calls from this unidentified asshole. The stalker, you know what, we're not calling him a stalker, we're calling him a dickhead. The dickhead seemed to be very aware of her schedule, where she would be, when, and even what she was wearing on certain days. On May 28, 1980, Dorothy had been attending a work meeting that night, and she noticed that one of her coworkers, a Conrad Bostron, wasn't looking very well, and he had some really big red marks on his arm. Pam Head, a coworker of Dorothy's, stated in an interview with Paul Azan that the bumps were the size of golf balls. So Dorothy and Pam decided they needed to get Conrad to the hospital, and the 3 left the meeting and headed for the hospital. On the way to the hospital, Dorothy made a quick stop at her parents' house, where she dropped off her son, Sean. There are conflicting reports as to whether Sean was actually at the meeting with her, but according to Pam in the interview with Paula Zahn, Sean was with her at that meeting. I kind of believe her. Some reports say that Sean wasn't with her at the meeting, but that doesn't make sense that she would stop at her parents' house to check on Sean on her way to the hospital with Conrad and Pam if she was so concerned about Conrad's arm. It makes more sense that Sean was at the meeting with her and she stopped at her parents' house to drop him off so he wouldn't have to lay around the waiting room at the hospital. So when Dorothy stopped at the house to drop off Sean, her mother convinced her to change out of the black scarf she was wearing for a warmer red scarf. It was May in California, and using that wonderful magic Google box, I found out that it can get into the 50s at night, which for us Canadians is about 10 degrees Celsius, which I guess is pretty chilly for someone used to California weather. Here in Ontario, I would call that a beautifully balmy day. Some people feel that the color of the scarf isn't really important, but I think it is, and you'll find out a little later why. At the hospital, doctors determined that Conrad had been bitten by a freaking black widow spider. Huh, what? This is why I will never go to California. Well done, Dorothy, for catching that. That was probably the mother instinct in her coming out. Pam said that she and Dorothy remained in the ER waiting room and that at no time did Dorothy leave her sight while they were there. Conrad was discharged around 11 p.m. and the doctors gave him a prescription to fill. Wait, a 2-hour emergency room visit? Start to finish? Ugh, the 80s. Dorothy offered to bring her car, a 1973 white Toyota station wagon, up to the exit of the emergency room. I miss the shaggin' wagons. So many memories from mine in the 70s and 80s. Dorothy didn't want Conrad to walk too far in his condition, as he was still not feeling all that great. Pam said that Dorothy used the restroom briefly and then headed out to the parking lot. Pam and Conrad went to the pharmacy and waited for his prescription to be filled. Then they made their way to the exit, where Dorothy said she would be with the car. Once there, they waited, and they didn't see Dorothy's car. So after a few minutes, they started walking towards the parking lot where Dorothy had parked. Suddenly, Dorothy's car came speeding towards them. Its headlights were blinding them, so they couldn't see who was behind the wheel. They waved their arms and tried to get Dorothy's attention by screaming, but the car sped right past them and took a sharp right turn out of the parking lot. Initially, both thought that Dorothy had an emergency come up with her son. Pam and Conrad went back inside and decided to wait for her to come back. Pam stated in the interview with Paula Zahn that she and Conrad called Dorothy's parents to see if she had gone there, but she hadn't. A couple hours later, after not hearing from Dorothy and Dorothy not coming back, Pam and Conrad reported Dorothy missing to the police. Pam stated that she really couldn't tell if the police took her seriously or not, but they did come out and check out the scene. Police looked around the area where her car was parked in the parking lot. They found a pack of Marlboro cigarettes and a box of Kleenex on the ground where her car had been parked. Pam stated that she thinks that these two items could have fallen out of Dorothy's car during some kind of a struggle. Sherlock, the crime blogger, believes that someone was lying in wait for Dorothy and grabbed her as she returned to the car to pick up Pam and Conrad. But it was known that Dorothy didn't smoke. The chances of the cigarettes belonging to her are pretty slim, but police didn't see these items as proof of foul play. And as far as I could tell, and I looked hard for this, they never collected those two pieces of evidence. If Dorothy didn't smoke and the smokes didn't belong to anyone else, i.e. Pam or Conrad, which I couldn't find out if those smokes belonged to anyone, they could have belonged to the abductor. The kidnapper's fingerprints would have been on that pack. I'm sorry, but how is this entire situation not a cause for alarm? Dorothy was totally fine to drive Conrad and Pam to the hospital, even drops her son off at her parents', the two people that she trusts most in the world with her son, knowing that if anything were to happen to Sean, her parents would be able to handle it. Then she waits for over 2 hours for Conrad while he's in the emergency room. then offers to bring the car to pick them up at the door, but then speeds out of the parking lot without the people she's driving home. And if she had somewhere else to go, she would have told Pam she needed to be somewhere else. They sat in that waiting room for 2 hours. And if she did, for some unknown reason, get worried about Sean, she would have called her parents from the hospital. And according to Pam, she never made any phone calls from the hospital. Dorothy's brother said that Dorothy was not the type of person to just bail on someone in need, especially without saying anything to them. And she probably would have grabbed Pam and Conrad and taken both of them with her, or dropped them off at the store before heading on to wherever she needed to go. Now, this is something that I find really interesting. In the interview with Anthony Sherlock, Pam said that she actually wasn't sure if it was Pam's car that they saw leaving the parking lot. She also said that the headlights were not on. Then, in the interview with Paula Zahn, she says that the headlights were on, and that was why they couldn't see who was driving. Also, some early newspaper reports stated that the car that sped out of the parking lot that night was actually the car parked in front of Dorothy's car. So which is it, Pam? Were the headlights on or were they off? Was it Dorothy's car or wasn't it? This is one of the most important pieces of information in the case as far as I'm concerned. So if the headlights were off, why couldn't you see who was driving? Or at least see if it was a man or a woman, or catch a small glimpse of something of the person driving the car. The car went right past you in the parking lot. Also, it had to be Dorothy's car that sped out of the parking lot. Otherwise, Dorothy's car would still be in the parking space, wouldn't it? What's going on, Pam? What's with these discrepancies? If you can't remember correctly, or if you're just questioning your memory about the facts from that night, just say so. Don't add facts that aren't true, unless you want to muddy the waters. About 4 hours later, around 4:30 a.m., a resident called the police to report smoke in an alleyway. Dorothy Scott's car was found in the alley about 5 miles from the hospital. The interior was completely engulfed in flames. There was no sign of Dorothy or anyone else. Sergeant Bob Taft, the current cold case investigator assigned to Dorothy's case, said that it was evident that whoever left the vehicle was in a hurry. The headlights were still on and the driver's door was open. A gas canister was found in the back of Dorothy's car, and it was determined that an accelerant had been put on the passenger side seat of the car. The outer front of the car was pretty much left intact, but the interior of the car was completely destroyed. I've seen the crime scene photos of the car after they put the fire out, and it is literally gutted. There's nothing left. Jacob and his son Jim, Dorothy's brother, went together to look at the remains of Dorothy's car. Jim said it was heart-wrenching and so hard to see her vehicle completely destroyed like that. After Dorothy's obvious abduction at the hospital, her father, Jacob, worked very closely with the Irvine police. They decided to keep the case quiet so that they didn't give away too much information, which is smart, and a lot of police forces do this in a lot of cases. About a week after Dorothy's disappearance, the Scotts received a phone call at their home. When Vera, Dorothy's mom, answered the phone, the caller asked her, "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" When she replied yes, the caller simply said, "I've got her," and hung up. 2 weeks and no leads later, Jacob decided to take the news of his daughter to the local newspaper. The Santa Ana Register ran the story of Dorothy's disappearance and what had happened to her vehicle on Thursday, June 11th, 1980. They also offered a $2,500 reward for anyone with any information regarding what happened to Dorothy. The same day, the managing editor of the Santa Ana Register, Pat Riley, received a call while sitting inside the newsroom. The caller said that he had kidnapped Dorothy Jane Scott. Riley stated that the caller said, "She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." Riley states that he felt the man was genuine and that it wasn't a hoax caller. He also said that the man shared information about the kidnapping that wasn't known to the general public. The man said he knew Dorothy was at the hospital with a coworker who had been bitten by a spider and that she was wearing a red scarf. He also said Dorothy had called him that night to tell him that she was at the hospital. But remember, if we believe Pam, she told investigators that Dorothy never left her side and didn't make any phone calls. She said that the only time that they were separated was when Dorothy used the restroom and then went out to her car. The following June, a man called the Orange County Register and said he had killed Dorothy Scott. This same asshole kept making terrifying phone calls for 4 years, every Wednesday afternoon, to Vera, Dorothy's mother. The caller would always say that he just had Dorothy or that he had killed her. The police set up a recording and tracing device to try and track the phone calls, but the caller never stayed on the line long enough for them to nail down where he actually was calling from. Something else that was strange about these calls, the caller would only ever interact on the phone if it was Vera who answered it. If anyone else answered the calls on the Wednesday afternoon, the caller would just hang up. The police have never released any of these phone calls to the public. In April of 1984, Jacob answered the phone when one of the calls was supposed to be coming in. As soon as Jacob said hello, the caller hung up, and the call stopped. On August 6, 1984, a construction company worker preparing to dig a trench for Pacific Bell telephone lines found the charred remains of a dog mixed with human remains. Once the remains were removed and taken to the coroner's office, it was discovered it was only partial human remains. However, a human skull was among the remains in the ditch, and dental records confirmed that these were the remains of Dorothy Jane Scott. So now I hate this killer even more. He killed and burned a dog along with Dorothy. What an absolute shit pig this bastard is. A turquoise ring and a small wristwatch were also found near the remains. Dorothy's mother, Vera, identified them as belonging to Dorothy. Police have stated that they aren't sure what, if any, connection there is between the dog and Dorothy, or how long the dog had been there. Theories circle around that the dog could have belonged to the killer, who decided to bury the dog there with Dorothy when it passed away, which kind of holds weight, but I doubt the dog was next to Dorothy by pure coincidence or accident. There was a brush fire that had swept through the area where Dorothy was found in 1982. And when you add in possible insect activity and scavengers, and that she was outside in the elements, these could all be factors in her remains being reduced down just to skeletal remains. Normally, without insect activity, which there is almost always insect activity on human remains, a body left exposed to the elements can be reduced to bones as quickly as in 10 days, and Dorothy had probably been there for about 4 years. Because of the state of Dorothy's remains, it was impossible for anyone to determine what her cause of death was. But after Dorothy's remains were found, the family started receiving the calls again. This poor family, this asshat will just not leave them alone. When the phone would ring and Vera answered the call, the caller would just simply ask, "Is Dorothy home?" and then hang up. So again, police set up a tracer on the Scott family's phone line, but the caller kept all the calls short, and again, the police were unable to get a trace on where this piece of garbage was. I wasn't able to find any information anywhere on how long the second batch of calls went on for. A creepy little tidbit that Vera said in an interview in one of the papers was that Dorothy's watch had stopped at 12:30 a.m. on March 29th, 1980, just an hour after she was seen alive. I'm curious if the watch was broken or if it actually stopped and needed to be wound. That very well could have been the time of death for Dorothy. Unfortunately, Dorothy's parents would never get any more answers about what happened to their daughter. Jacob passed away on May 24th, 1994, and Vera passed 8 years later in 2002. Dorothy's son, Sean, grew up in as good of circumstances as one can hope, given what happened to his mother. He's still searching for justice for his mom. He said that what happened to his mom completely destroyed Vera and ruined the rest of her life, that she was never the same after Dorothy went missing. And that's literally the story of the disappearance and murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. There's never been any further leads or anything to tell us who took Dorothy and what happened to her. But let's take a look at some of the suspects in the case. So the first suspect that came up, of course, was Dennis Terry. He was Sean's father. Dennis Terry had been in town visiting a few days prior to Dorothy going missing. And interestingly, Dorothy and Dennis had gotten into a pretty heated argument because Dennis showed up and told Dorothy that he wanted full custody of Sean and wanted to take Sean back to Missouri. He said, "You've had him for 4 years, and now I want him for 4 years. Then you can have him back." Which, that is just man thinking right there, because that is just the most ridiculous fucking thing I've ever heard of. Let's raise a child. You get 4 years, I get 4 years. Yeah, that should work. Anyway, Dorothy completely shut down the idea and told Dennis there's absolutely no way you're getting Sean. Now, to give props where some props are due, I think it's good that Sean's dad wanted to be a bigger part of his life, but the instability and confusion that would come from uprooting a 4-year-old from the only parent he's ever known would just destroy that kid and traumatize him to no end. If he was living closer, but he was in Missouri, and I don't know how far away Missouri is. I'll look at a map, but I'm sure it's not close to California. Okay, there's California. Missouri's on the other side of the freaking country. Yeah, it wouldn't have worked. I should really learn the map of the states better. I don't know that much of it. The police were pretty quick to question Dennis to see if he had any connection, but Dennis was in Missouri at the time of Dorothy's disappearance, and he had all of his receipts for the 2-day bus trip that it took to get there and get back to Missouri. He gave the police the receipts, and there were several witnesses that reported seeing him get on the bus and off in Missouri. So Dennis Terry is off the suspect list. Next, we have John Kikola. He was the man who owned and managed the 2 stores where Dorothy worked. According to Anthony Sherlock, the crime blogger, he apparently owned the land where Dorothy's remains were found, which I couldn't find anywhere else. So if that is true, he uncovered something pretty interesting. If Kikola did kill her and leave her there, he probably thought that the animals or Mother Nature would just take care of the body and she would never be found because it was his property. Where Dorothy was found was kind of at the bottom of a hill. And Sherlock is convinced that Dorothy was at the top of the hill when she was disposed of, and that over the 4 years it took to find her, that because of weather and nature and erosion and all that kind of stuff, Dorothy's body slowly slid down the hillside and then was found by the construction worker. John Kikola was one of the few people who knew that Dorothy was going to the hospital that night. But he didn't know that she changed her scarf. How would he? Why would he? There is that. I mean, he could have followed them in his car to the hospital and taken Dorothy. Now, the reason that Anthony Sherlock focused on Kikola was because in 1996, John Kikola was indicted on federal charges relating to tax evasion. So, maybe, this is just a possible scenario, Dorothy figured out that something was amiss when working the books, and when Kikola realized that she knew what he was up to, maybe he got rid of her to avoid being caught. Anthony Sherlock thinks that if it was Kikola, he probably started calling Dorothy with all these strange phone calls to make people think that it was an obsessed stalker that killed her and to get the attention away from him. He would know her schedule. He would know what she was wearing. She would know the voice. I think she would know the voice a little bit better than what she claimed to know the voice, but he might have been disguising it. And remember that Jacob, Dorothy's father, answered the call one time and the call stopped? It could be because Dorothy's father knew Kikola. He sold him the stores. Sherlock says that he has other details that led him to believe that Kikola was more involved in Dorothy's disappearance and murder, but he won't give out the information, or he hasn't yet. So we'll have to keep an eye on that blog and see if he ever does let it go. And now we come to the last suspect. This is a man named Mike Butler. He was an acquaintance of Dorothy's. He worked at an auto body shop across the street from where Dorothy worked. Butler was the brother of one of Dorothy's co-workers, one Rosemary Butler. Dorothy and Mike were friendly, but never had any kind of romantic involvement. It was public knowledge that Mike had a bit of an infatuation with Dorothy, and when the police approached him and questioned him about Dorothy's disappearance, he told the police that he wanted to marry her. I'm going to let that sink in. That's creepy, and that's probably not what you want to say to a police officer who's investigating the disappearance of a woman. I'm just saying. So because Mike worked across the street, he saw Dorothy all the time. He would have been familiar with her work schedule and probably saw what she was wearing on a normal basis. So if Mike was the stalker, that would explain how he knew so much about her comings and goings and what she was wearing. But the police never thought that Mike Butler was a solid lead, and he was never investigated further. Butler died in 2014. And I've done a little online digging, and I did a nice deep Reddit dive. Rosemary, who was Mike Butler's sister, was a member of a semi-famous rock band from the 70s named Bertha. She played bass. Bertha was actually able to achieve some pretty fabulous success for themselves. They toured US, Canada, and Europe on their own, but prior to having their own tour, they played with Fleetwood Mac, Alice Cooper, Poco, Black Oak, Arkansas, Cheech and Chong, B.B. King, Three Dog Night. I guess you could say they were actually pretty famous during the 70s. Remember at the beginning of the show I told you that Dorothy had toured with a band for a little bit? Well, I wasn't able to confirm it, but my suspicion is that it might have been Bertha or another band that Bertha played with, because Mike Butler was a roadie for Bertha and went on tour with them. I am so curious, and I wish I could have found it, but I couldn't find it, even in the depths of hell in Reddit. I want to know what band Dorothy toured with. Bertha broke up in 1975, which is about when Rosemary started working at one of the shops. I'm not sure which one, but you can bet your bottom ass dollar that Mike Butler was in those shops on the regular. I was also able to find Mike Butler's obituary, and it is all full of weird and creepy. I actually think he wrote it. It's entitled My Story. I'm going to read you a little bit from it because I think you need to hear this, and then you can make your own decisions. It starts out, have you ever noticed a person who seems interested in you, not for a particular reason or because they want something from you, but genuinely interested in you and who you are? They want to help you simply because to them it seems the right thing to do. Perhaps they might talk to you about a problem you might be struggling with and guide you towards some possible options or resolutions. Or maybe they might seem to sense you are just a little lonely and might want to talk to another person who will listen and be sincerely concerned with what you have to say. He might show up at your doorstep wanting to fix your toilet leak or that annoying noise your whatchamacallit is making, often without even charging you anything for his time or the supplies. If you met Mike Butler, you undoubtedly recognize he was just that sort of a person. A bear of a man, Mike did not look the type you necessarily wanted as a neighbor or even a friend. With a full scraggly beard and a seemingly endless number of hats that he and his friends could laugh about and even wear, Mike cut a path that others just felt inclined to follow because they sensed his good, old-fashioned desire to be wherever you might need him. He readily shared his zeal for his beliefs. He was a deeply religious man. It would be difficult to find any locals on Orcas Island whose life was not touched by him. He was drafted into the United States Army at the age of 20. finished basic training and advanced individual training in infantry, and then something very unusual happened. Mike's attitude and attention to detail was noted, and he was trained and served as a drill instructor for new recruits. After serving briefly in that capacity, he was assigned overseas to Hohenfels, Germany in 1967 and became a news writer reporter and was often published in Stars and Stripes News. He served as the base commander's public information and media officer and photographer as well. When Mike's time in the Army was complete, his civilian life was quite different from the military life he had been used to. He became a music roadie for several rock bands, including the Beach Boys and Bertha, an all-girl rock band his sister was a member of. But what Mike Butler was most known for was his ability to be a visionary, confidant, trusted neighbor, and loyal friend. He will be deeply missed by many. I don't know about you, but that just gave me shivers up and down my body. Just little things in there, like he was a roadie for more than just Bertha. The drill sergeant, his attention to detail. He was a news reporter. That would explain why he would call the papers. He was a photographer. Just all kinds of creepy in there. That's just a little information on some of the suspects of Dorothy Jane Scott's disappearance and murder. You'd have to decide for yourself because there's nothing happening in this investigation. My thoughts. Here are some of the questions I have about this case. Why would Pam and Conrad think that Dorothy had an emergency come up with her son? There were no cell phones back then, so how would Dorothy know if there was something wrong with her son? She had been with Pam the entire time, and Pam never stated in her interview that Dorothy used a phone to check in on Sean. So the fact that they thought that just does not make sense to me. The fact that the caller would never talk to Jacob leads me, and probably some of you, to think that the man was someone Jacob may have known. Maybe the caller was afraid that Jacob would recognize his voice. The dog found with Dorothy. I have a couple thoughts on this. If the killer burned the dog with Dorothy, then the dog must have meant something to him. Maybe it was his dog and he needed to destroy everything that he loved. Just a thought. We know he was stalking Dorothy and professing his psychotic love for her. Maybe he happened upon an already dead dog and decided to burn both of them together to create confusion. But I really doubt that he found a burned dog and decided to burn Dorothy's remains in the same place. Anthony Sherlock, the crime blogger, he conducted interviews with both Pam and the police officer that's investigating now, and both of them do not believe that the place Dorothy was found is where she was left. They think that she was left high up on a hill, and rain and erosion and animals made the bones slide down the hill. But that would still mean the dog was with her. The dog had to be touching her body for those bones to be entwined. What are the chances of a dog and a human being burned up on a hill and then weather and erosion slide them down a hill over 4 years and entangle their bones at the bottom of the hill? Pretty slim, I would say. And my last question is, what happened to the pack of smokes and the Kleenex box that the police found in the spot where Dorothy's car was parked in the hospital parking lot? If Dorothy didn't smoke, and I couldn't find that those smokes belonged to Pam or Conrad, whose smokes were they? And if they were taken in as evidence, were they fingerprinted? Did the police look for a pile of cigarette butts somewhere from the kidnapper standing in wait for Dorothy? And if they didn't, why the fuck didn't they pick up that pack of smokes? So many unanswered questions in this case. Personally, I lean towards Mike Butler as the best suspect for Dorothy's disappearance and murder, just because he was a drill sergeant, he was trained in infantry, so he knew how to sneak up on people. And a drill sergeant is used to everyone doing what they say without question, and if you do question what they tell you to do, there are severe consequences. He was kind of creepy and kind of strange. He worked across the street from where she worked. His sister worked with Dorothy. He told the police that he wanted to marry her. He toured with his sister's band and other bands, and Dorothy toured with bands. With this guy, the boxes just keep getting ticked, 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 you know? But Sadly, we'll probably never know for sure what happened to Dorothy or who killed her. Many of the players in this case have passed on. I get a little comfort believing that wherever Butler is, and if he did take Sean's mother away from him all those years ago, he will pay for it in some way for what he did. I personally believe that karma follows a person until it's sated. I hope you enjoyed that case. I'd never heard of Dorothy's disappearance. I hope you have a wonderful week. If you enjoyed this case or any of the other cases that we've covered, please head over to the Patreon page and show us some love, show us some support. And with that, I will leave you for the week. Enjoy your day today. This has been a Bitter Witness production.